Ukraine adopting a slow approach to the counteroffensive. What exactly does a slow approach mean?
Well, I think what they're talking about is the reality that the approach that the Ukrainians had been preparing for, that is to take armored forces, find a seam in the Russian defenses, and then rapidly exploit that to burst through the defenses, get into the rear area of Russia. Try and repeat what they did in Kharkov in September and October of last year. That this has failed. The Russians have put in an impenetrable wall of defense. And so the armored vehicles, as soon as they enter these minefields, are being halted. Artillery is raining down on them and taking them out. So it's an impractical approach, an unsustainable approach. And so what they're doing instead is going old school, and they're taking infantry and they're basically just um, pouring infantry into smaller objectives to seize little bite-sized pieces, and then just keep pushing forward. They call it the slow approach, but it's basically an extraordinarily bloody approach. It's an approach again that isn't going to work, because even though they are successful with this tactic, because the Russians aren't in the business of dying. I mean, there's a lot of Russians dying, but the Russians aren't willing to sacrifice an entire company of soldiers to hold a village at all costs. So if the Ukrainians decide we're going to move forward and take this particular tactical objective, and they're going to put artillery in and they're going to push the troops in, regardless of the cost, what the Russians do is they absorb that attack, then they withdraw to uh, new positions in the rear. The Ukrainians will take their objective, and then the Russians will hit that with artillery and then launch their own counterattack and push the Ukrainians out. Now, sometimes the Ukrainians are able to bring in more infantry and hold on to this village. And that's considered to be a victory. But again, it's an unsustainable victory. This is what they mean by the slow approach. Somebody was commenting on this approach and basically said that if this is the approach that Ukraine is taking to reach the Sea of Azov, it's going to take them years to get there, and they're going to run out of men. So the slow approach is just spinning that Ukraine has failed in their counteroffensive and has no chance at all of succeeding.
Throwing them into the meat grinder essentially is what's happening. And we're seeing continued reports from a number of Ukrainian soldiers who are now coming forward and telling the truth about how they were commissioned or brought into the military. I just want to play one example. This is a Ukrainian soldier. I guess you could call him that. He was sitting on a park bench with a degenerative spinal condition, awaiting to get medical care when he was approached. And he tells the story of this is very, very common being brought into the military. Listen.
Сидел на скамейке, подошли с военкомату парни, спитали, чи я стою на облику на военкомате. Я сказал, не знаю. Они тогда взяли меня паспорт и сказали, садись в машину. Я садился в машину, отвезли меня на военкомат. Медкомиссию я не проходил. Я пришел в больницу, хотел пройти медкомиссию, они сами все прошли за меня. У меня проблемы с позвоночником. Когда забирали, я говорил, что у меня проблемы с позвоночником. Они меня не хотели слушать и проверять. Подготовка в Великобритании была плохая. Я как-то строчку не служил, а там проходили подготовку 1 месяц.
So, Scott, we've seen multiple reports like this where disabled individuals, mentally handicapped individuals, people with degenerative spinal conditions are being rounded up, people not wanting to leave their homes for fear of being rounded up and thrown into this meat grinder.
Well, I mean, look, the Ukrainians have a problem. They're running out of men. The army that they had, and remember, they started this conflict with a regular army of 260,000, another 300,000 trained reserves, and another 700,000 territorials. That's, again, simple Marine math, 1.2 million people capable of being put under arms. They're gone. They're gone.
Wow.
And so what they have to do is get more people out there. They're running out of qualified, manpower, healthy manpower. First of all, the other thing is Ukraine is so corrupt. If you pay the military commissar the fee, you won't get rounded up. So the people they're rounding up are the people that aren't paying the bribes, and those people tend to be, a lot of them, or the younger ones, are smart. They'll just hide. They don't get caught. So the people left are the guys who think, I have nothing to fear. I'm crippled. I got a bum knee. I'm old. I got a degenerative spinal condition. Things of that nature, and it doesn't matter because they aren't looking for healthy, fit manpower. They're looking for bodies. They need bodies to throw into this meat grinder because it's a process of trying to wear the Russians down. And so you're just throwing body after body after body. And understand, these aren't well trained soldiers either. They're getting minimal training, and then they're being thrown into into this horrific situation. And the casualties are mind boggling. I bring this up to everybody who says we need to support the Ukrainians. We need to give them more. We need to do this. All you're doing is condemning hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men to die. Ukraine cannot win this war. There's zero scenario that can be written right now that has Ukraine winning this war for any number of reasons, but number one of which is they have run out of trained manpower. War is a complicated business. In addition to being a bloody business, it's a complicated business. If you're going up against a well-trained enemy, and the Russians are well-trained, understand that principles of maneuver come into play, that you have to be skilled in knowing, how to suppress an enemy position, how to maneuver, how to coordinate, how to call in artillery. It takes years to train people to do this. And when you get two armies of similar training up against each other, then what happens is they wear each other down until somebody gets an advantage that can be exploited. At that point in time, the wise enemy withdraws from the battlefield to regroup, to start over again. The Ukrainians can't even get into this fight. This isn't even a Pop Warner team trying to play an NFL team. This is basically a bunch of third graders who should be playing touch football or flag football, walking into the Super Bowl, challenging the defending Super Bowl champions. There is no chance whatsoever for these guys to win. And this is the reality. There's nothing we can do. No weapon system we can provide, no amount of artillery shells we can provide, no amount of money we can throw into this problem. The Ukrainians cannot win. They have crossed that critical threshold where they can't recover from the losses that they've sustained. And this is the reality of this conflict.
Yesterday on Fox and Friends, you saw mainstream media talking about this idea that we're out of ammunition. We've sent so much of ammunition and weapons to Ukraine that the United States can't even restock its own supplies. It would take many, many years. But I want to play a clip of this because I think that there's a sentiment among some members of Congress that we need to take a war footing against Russia, that we need to really ramp up our military production in order to take on Russia. Listen.
So they've looked at exactly how long it's going to take to restock our munitions. When it comes to the 155 caliber shells, it's going to take between 4 and 7 years to replace it. That's a long time. They are estimating that the javelins we have given to Zelensky will take 8 years to replace. And the Stinger missiles that we've shipped 1 trillion of them over there, this is jaw-dropping. They say it will take 18 years to replace them. So, when the president reveals we're out of stuff, we're out of a lot of stuff.
But there's a couple of things that add to that. That's if we do the current way we're doing it. We have to adjust the way we're doing it. And we got to get into almost a wartime footing.
So, Scott, that's what we need to do, is have a war footing in military production. What exactly is he talking about? Is that to go up against Russia? China?
Well, first of all, it's to survive. If I'm in the military, remember my job in the military is to prepare for any potential conflict scenario that the United States might realistically run into, and we have contingency plans that we make up. whether it's if China invades Taiwan and we get involved in a fight there, if North Korea comes across the border, we get in a fight there, if Russia decides to push in on the Baltics or Poland and we get in a fight there, if Iran does something, we have to get in a fight there. Every one of these has a contingency plan that has forces allocated to that, and those forces have to have resources allocated to them capable of dealing with the problem set. And these are all complicated problem sets. And what we're also learning is that we haven't imagined the right war. We've been building our support packages based upon old thinking that placed precision over massed fires, meaning that we needed less artillery. That's okay. But as long as we can put precision fires down on the enemy, we don't have a lot of artillery shells. Well, we're learning in Ukraine that that's just a flawed premise. Ukraine is firing between 5,000 and 7,000 artillery rounds a day. We currently produce 85,000 rounds a year.
Whoa.
Thank you very much for that look, because that's what's going on. So Ukraine will fire what we produce in a year in less than a month. And so what we've been doing to sustain them is stripping our stocks that are used to back up these various contingency plans. And what the Pentagon's not going to tell you, and what the president's not going to tell you, is that if we go to war today, we can't win a single conflict. You want to know why? We have no ammunition. Want to know why? Because we gave it to the Ukrainians. Now, we have some ammunition, but the ammunition that we have generals saying, okay, we need to retain a minimal amount of stocks to meet a contingency, but those contingencies we're learning are based on flawed assumptions on artillery expenditure rates that are unrealistic. In the Gulf War, which is one of the conflicts, America's always accused, and there's brilliant writers who talk about this, we always train based upon the last war. And the last big war we fought was the Gulf War, 1991. We fired 60,000 artillery rounds for the entire war, 60,000. And that was considered to be a pretty, we were pumping out rounds. We were doing okay. Russia fires 60,000 rounds in one day in this conflict. Do you understand the scope and scale that we're talking about? We aren't ready for this conflict. So even when we gave Ukraine ammunition, we said, well, we're going to keep enough to meet our contingency requirements. But now the generals are going in and recalculating and saying, we made a mistake, because the ammunition that we have right now that's supposed to last for a conflict that can extend 3-4 months, we're going to run out of ammunition in 7 days. And then we got nothing, zero. And this is going to be for any conflict we get involved in, any, not just Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, anything. If we get involved in a major fight, we're going to lose because we have no ammunition. And this is why they're saying we need to go on a wartime footing, because what we're trying to do right now this isn't just about Ukraine. This is a serious national defense problem. We need to start producing ammunition. Give you again, the Russians, they're producing, I think, 3.2 million rounds a year. We produce 85,000. Do you understand what I'm saying? The Russians have geared it up, and they're gearing up even more. They're going to produce even more because the Russians understand what's going on. The Russians have built an army that's expanded from 900,000 to 1.5 million because of NATO expansion. They're in the process of putting a 70,000 man strong core-sized unit in the St. Petersburg area, a new military district, to oppose Finland. And what Russia is doing as they build this up, they have to produce the artillery that's on hand, because when you go to war, it's not about what you can produce. It's about what you have right now. We don't have anything. We have nothing. Russia's, meanwhile, stocking everything up. So Finland needs to understand that if they ever get in a shooting match with Russia, once that core comes up, Finland's going to run out of ammunition. And in modern warfare, when you run out of artillery ammunition, you lost the war. It's over. This is the reality right now. So that's why they're saying we have, and it's not just artillery, as they pointed out. The Javelin missiles, we emptied our stocks, poured everything in there. We got nothing left. I mean, we've got enough, but again, it was based upon flawed assumptions about how much we're going to expend. We now understand that we're going to fire more Javelins in a day than we had prepared for the entire campaign. Same thing with Stingers. we haven't been producing Stingers because we haven't been fighting anybody that has an Air Force. So we when you look at a defense budget, it's like, why do we need to buy new Stingers? Why do we need to keep a Stinger production line up and running? We're not fighting anybody. We have some on hand. If we get in a fight with somebody with an Air Force, we have enough to get by. Now we realize that if we have to go up against the Russians and they bring the drones in, the drones swarm in, and we need the Stingers to take out, we don't have them, which means early on in any conflict with Russia, they're immediately going to seize control of the airspace over our forces, and they're going to hammer us with kamikaze drones. To give you another example of how Russia's gone on a war footing and we haven't, they started this conflict with a drone called the Lancet 3. It's a loiter drone. It's a very effective weapon. They fire it off. It loiters over the battlefield, has an optic system, finds the target, hits the target, kills the target. But these drones were made in small batches. The Russians now have gone into full-scale production. Right now, they can produce 200,000 of these drones a year. They're getting ready to scale that up to 2 million a year. And they're building a new drone that they've updated during the war, learning lessons. And they're going to hit us what they call the swarm of drone approach. Basically, when you watch these shows where they release the drones and they at nighttime and all the lights come on and the drones turn into a running man and all that because they're talking to each other. Now imagine if you take that technology, throw 200 drones over the battlefield that are communicating with each other, and they come over the battlefield and you can't shoot them down because you don't have any Stinger missiles anymore. So they get to loiter over the battle any way they want, talking to each other. They pick 200 targets, coordinate amongst each other, and bam, they kill everything at once. That's the future of war. We're going to lose, Clayton. We're going to lose like you've never seen loss before. This is what's happening to the Ukrainians right now. The Russians have learned every lesson there is to learn about modern conflict, and they've adapted it because they have geared up their defense industry on a wartime footing. And they are producing things in the quantities necessary to sustain conflict against a peer level enemy in a large scale ground combat scenario in Europe. And they're improving their technology. These drones are a game changer if you don't have air defense, and we don't have air defense.
I just got chills thinking about that. It's unbelievable. And I guess this is why, and I'll get you out of here on this, Scott, which is the Ukrainian defense minister has called for the abolition of the constitutional norm prohibiting the deployment of foreign military bases in the country, essentially making it available now that in Ukraine, they would allow foreign military bases, i.e., I guess, NATO bases in Ukraine. And we hear reports of Russia amassing forces in the north, as well as near Odessa for a large-scale attack. What do you make of that piece of it, the military bases and this large-scale Russian attack?
Look, Ukraine is desperate right now. They understand what's happening. They understand that they've lost, and that the only way that they can change this is if NATO directly intervenes. And so they're trying to create a situation. It's not just about the bases. You have Zelensky working with President Duda of Poland to talk about erasing the border between Poland and Western Ukraine, creating some sort of union, political union that would allow Polish troops to come in and all this stuff. At the Vilnius summit that just took place, the NATO summit, the United States and others threw cold water on that because it's Jake Sullivan, who I don't like very much, but he said, any scenario that talks about creating the potential for direct conflict between the United States and Russia is talking about World War III, talking about the end of the world, and we're just not going to even entertain that discussion. John Kirby did the same thing when they said, why don't we challenge the Russians in the Black Sea? Why don't we, because of this, the end of the grain deal, why don't we send U.S. Navy ships and escort these grain ships out? And Kirby said, because that'll put us in direct conflict with the Russians. That's World War III. We're not going to do it. So Ukraine really wants the world to commit suicide in order to save Ukraine. That's what we're talking about. Now, about the troop buildups, I've been saying this all along, and so have most people who follow the war in Ukraine. When Russia mobilized the 300,000, they sent about 80,000 to 100,000 of those 300,000 to the front to fill in units that had been under strength, undermanned. In addition to those 300,000 that were mobilized, another 150 to 200,000 volunteers were brought in. And these volunteer units likewise have been fed into the front line. But what no one's talking about is around 200,000 Russian soldiers that were mobilized and were taken away to be trained, to be organized into offensive-minded organizations. given the most modern equipment, the most detailed training. They've been training nonstop. They got mobilized in October. They've been training since November. It's now July. They've been training really hard, and their job is to wait until Ukraine has wasted its offensive capability, wasted its primary remaining military capabilities, which they're doing right now. And then once Ukraine is punch drunk, punched out, has no fight left into them, counterattack. And so what we're seeing right now is in the north towards Kharkov, about 100,000 Russians from these reserves being brought in, and they're going to begin the process of pushing the Ukrainians back. They're going to begin the process of doing what Vladimir Putin spoke of. He said, we will recapture all of Russia's territory. Remember, Russia views Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk to be Russia. And so any Ukrainian troops that are on the territory of those are, from the Russian perspective, on Russian soil. We will recapture all of Russia, he said, and then we will push the Ukrainians back to the distance of the longest range of the weapons provided by NATO so that Ukraine can never again strike Russian soil, which means they have to be pushed back 150 kilometers. That's what these 200,000 troops are going to do. So Ukraine mobilized 60,000 troops to train for this counteroffensive. Already over 20,000 of them are dead. The other 40,000 are going to die. That when that happens, their best trained troops are gone. They still have some units that are capable, but now we're talking about 1,000 miles of frontage. These guys can't be everywhere. The Russians are bringing in 200,000 troops. Some rumors are that another 100,000 are being massed in the Kherson region. Why? Odessa. Kharkov, Odessa, two Russian cities that are probably going to be occupied by Russia sometime by the end of summer, early fall, when I believe the Ukrainian army will collapse because you can no longer sustain combat. You become combat ineffective. We talked earlier about the training necessary to maneuver, to put down fire, to coordinate. When you lose that ability, all you have is raw meat, and raw meat just gets ground up. The Ukrainians are coming to the point where all they have is raw meat, and there will be a general collapse of the Ukrainian army. And when that happens, the Russians have 200,000 fresh troops ready to exploit that. And I think we're seeing the transition into this final phase of the conflict.
I think you're absolutely right about it. Scott Ritter, great to see you. As always, thank you for your analysis.